The void of real space stretches endlessly before the fleet, a black so deep it seems to swallow thought itself. Stars glitter like distant promises, yet between them, entire systems disappear, leaving nothing but silent echoes that ripple across the Imperium's data chains. Rumors whisper through the halls of the Adeptus Mechanicus and the corridors of Terra itself. One moment, a world thrives under the Emperor's gaze, its people humming in manufactorums and cathedrals alike, and the next, it is gone, unmarked, erased as though it never existed. The airlocks hum with dread, and every navigator aboard the fleet's vessels shifts uneasily, feeling the pull of something unseen, something vast and indifferent. What force could erase entire star systems without trace? The answers lie buried in the shadowed spaces between knowledge and superstition, between prayer and fear. If you wish to traverse this mystery with me, to uncover the hidden currents of the galaxy where even the custodes dare not tread lightly, then join the journey. Like, share, and subscribe, and together we will peer into the spaces the Emperor himself may not touch. The void outside the hull shimmered with distant pinpricks of light, each star a beacon of stability in a cosmos that seemed suddenly unhinged. Lieutenant Captain Ralvin stood at the edge of the bridge viewport, the hum of the ship's engines vibrating through the deck beneath his boots, a low, constant reminder of fragile life pressed against endless emptiness. Reports had begun to arrive from the sector's outer systems. Coordinates once teeming with manufactorums, forges, and hab blocks, now empty. Whole worlds had simply ceased to exist, leaving nothing behind but scattered signals and the faint traces of psychic echoes caught in the navigational arrays. No warp storms had been recorded, no anomalies marked in the latest scans. It was as if some unseen hand had swept across the star charts, erasing history itself. Ralvin's eyes shifted from the viewport to the data slate clutched in his gauntlet hand. Streams of numbers flickered, coordinates blinking red where silence had replaced activity. A Skitarii tech priest muttered under his respirator, fingers moving over conduits and cogitator panels as he muttered prayers to the Omnisia, offering incense to the machine spirits and invoking rites that had survived countless millennia. "The machine spirits are confused," he said, voice grinding against the metallic resonance of his servos. "They do not understand. They cannot account for absence." Each word reverberated through the bridge like a warning, and Ralvin felt the weight of that impossibility pressing down upon him. To the Imperium, absence was dangerous. Erasure was blasphemy against the Emperor's order. Across the command deck, the navigators shifted nervously within their gravity fields. Their third eyes pulsed, tracing currents of the warp that the human mind could barely comprehend. A subtle trembling of their bodies betrayed the unease of men who had spent decades mastering the void, yet could not grasp the meaning of a star system snuffed out without warning. "It is not warp-touched," murmured one, voice tight, lips moving without sound in the confined chamber of the navigator's niche. "It is missing." And in that single word, the entire bridge felt the cold brush of incomprehensible dread. Outside, the emptiness seemed to deepen. Sensors strained against the void, recording only the faint hum of distant suns and the pulse of the ship's own life support reactors. Every flicker of Prometheum light from far-off starports that remained seemed almost mocking, a reminder of permanence where none existed. Ralvin turned to the bridge crew, scanning their faces beneath visors and helm plates. Each bore the same tension, the unspoken fear of witnessing a reality bending beyond reason. And yet, protocol demanded the report be compiled, data transmitted back to the Administratum, to Terra itself, even if what they sent could not be reconciled with truth. Rumors had begun to spread among the lower decks. Servitors whispered of void shadows, of ancient enemies awakening beyond the Imperium's comprehension. Some spoke in hushed tones of Necron tomb worlds stirring, devouring light and life, while others, more desperate, whispered of the Emperor himself turning his gaze, withdrawing protection for reasons unknown. The words were muttered carefully, for fear of inquisitorial attention. Yet in every corridor, the silence between the stars was growing louder than any voice. Ralvan felt it as a physical pressure, the way the void seemed to intrude into the hull, testing the limits of human endurance. Even the vessel's hull bore witness to the anomaly. Sensors noted minute fluctuations in gravitic fields, magnetic disturbances without cause, but the readings were inconsistent, fleeting, frustratingly untraceable. Some of the older tech priests began consulting ancient liturgies, invoking prayers to the Omnisia and the Emperor in equal measure, seeking guidance where calculation failed. There was no logic that could justify absence on this scale. The systems were not destroyed. They were not in stasis. They had simply ceased. And in that cessation, the void itself seemed to lean closer, whispering questions with no answers. Ralvan exhaled slowly, his breath fogging against the viewport. The stars had always been a map, a certainty to guide mankind through darkness. Now, he felt that certainty slip, like sand through armored fingers. Somewhere, beyond the reach of his sensors and reason, a system had vanished entirely. Entire populations, entire cultures, their labor, their histories, all gone, leaving only an empty orbit. The thought was unbearable, and yet he could not tear his gaze from the black expanse. What force could obliterate entire star systems without warning, without trace? And if it could happen once, could it happen again, right under the Emperor's vigilant gaze? The bridge fell into a contemplative silence, broken only by the low hum of reactors and the occasional crackle from the Vox grill. The universe felt smaller, constricted, and yet more terrifyingly infinite than ever before. Somewhere in the dark, systems waited, waiting either to disappear or to reveal a truth too vast for any human mind to endure. Nightfall never came in the void, not as it did on a world with an atmosphere to scatter light. Darkness was absolute, a pressure that seeped into the mind as much as the bones. Lieutenant Captain Ralvan walked the length of the bridge, his gauntlets clinking softly against the metallic decking, eyes flicking between the bridge's displays and the viewport that framed the endless black. Each sensor ping was a reminder that life out here was fragile, a fleeting defiance against the cold certainty of the stars. The vanished systems gnawed at his understanding of reality. There were no signs of cataclysm, no warp storms, no asteroid bombardments recorded in the archives. It was as if the stars themselves had recoiled, retracting entire worlds into a hidden corner of the cosmos where no light could follow. The Skitarii tech priests were murmuring constantly, hands moving over data slates with the precision of ritual. Steam hissed from the exposed conduits of their cybernetic augmetics, carrying the faint, acrid scent of burning insulation. "Omnisia preserve us," muttered one, fingers tracing arcane diagrams etched into the metal surface of a cogitator. "What has wrought this absence?" Others joined, their voices layered in counterpoint, forming a chorus of concern and awe. Machines that had functioned for centuries, calculating trajectories and maintaining the lifeblood of humanity's vessels, now faltered, their spirits confused. The concept of a world simply removed from existence was alien even to them. Ralvan's attention drifted to the navigators again, their bodies suspended in the gravity fields, third eyes glowing softly in dim light. They whispered in tones that seemed almost musical, their words bending around the unspoken dread that hung thick as a fog over the command deck. "A system missing," one murmured, voice quivering. "No warp signature, no trace. Nothing but emptiness." Even trained in the arts of void and warp, these men and women could not disguise the instinctive fear that gripped them. To navigate is to know the stars, to trust that each world and sun can be counted and measured. Yet now, the very ground beneath those stars had evaporated, leaving them unmoored. A call came in from the communications array, crackling through the Vox grill with the distant resonance of another world's fear. Administratum data slates had begun sending fragmentary reports, some garbled, some terrifyingly clear. Entire planetary populations had gone silent, their orbital beacons extinguished, their manufactorums halted mid-process. The transmissions were inconsistent, often arriving after hours of static, but the message was unmistakable. Whole systems had vanished. No emergency protocols had been triggered. No automated defenses had activated. They were simply gone. Ralvin pressed a hand to his brow, feeling the hum of the ship beneath him, the living pulse of promethium in the pipes, the weight of machinery and life pressing in from all sides, yet utterly powerless to account for absence. Rumors had already begun to spread in the lower decks and among the auxiliary vessels following the fleet. Whispers of Necron tomb worlds awakening, devouring light and matter as they marched silently through the void. Some spoke of hidden orc warbands, so cunning and elusive they could remove worlds like pieces from a board. Others muttered that the Emperor himself had shifted his gaze, drawing away protection from certain sectors, testing the faith and resilience of his people. These ideas were impossible to confirm. They lingered in the corridors like a shadow, infecting the minds of those who dared to think beyond the immediate, feeding on uncertainty and fear. Ralvin returned to the viewport, staring into the darkness that seemed to pulse with unspoken menace. The missing systems were not destroyed, not hidden by warp storms. They had been removed, stripped from the fabric of reality. And in that removal lay a terror the Imperium had never faced before. The undeniable possibility that the galaxy itself was not a fixed order, but a tapestry being rewritten, thread by thread, without the sanction of any known power. Every command he issued felt hollow, each adjustment of the ship's course a small defiance against an incomprehensible void that could erase without effort or intent. In the silent hum of the bridge, Ralvin felt a chill that no armor could keep at bay. The stars outside continued to burn in their distant certainties, but the spaces between them were no longer safe. Each pulse of light that should have marked a system now passed over empty void, a reminder of absence more deafening than any cry. Somewhere in that silence, the Imperium had been challenged, and perhaps it was not yet ready to understand the depth of the threat. The lieutenant captain knew only one thing with certainty. The silence between the stars was not merely the absence of sound or light, it was the prelude to a reckoning that none could yet name. The void was patient, indifferent, stretching endlessly beyond the viewport, yet pressing insistently upon the minds of all aboard the vessel. Lieutenant Captain Ralvin could feel it, a subtle vibration through the deck plates, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. Even the Engine's hum seemed smaller here, diminished in significance by the vastness outside. He moved to the central data console, where cogitator screens flickered with unreadable patterns, coordinates blinking red, orbiting designations vanishing mid-readout, streams of data corrupted by absence. The Skitarii tech priests clustered around him, their faces hidden beneath masks of rusted bronze and etched sigils, chanting mechanical prayers in tones that rattled through the metallic walls. Their devotion was precise, unwavering, yet fear lay just beneath the surface of every uttered word. The Omnisia itself seemed perplexed, the machine spirits shivering against something they could not see. Ralvin tapped a finger against the hololithic display, forcing himself to focus. Reports from nearby sectors were arriving in fragmented bursts, fragmented enough that patterns were difficult to trace. Some systems had vanished gradually, orbit by orbit, others instantly, leaving nothing but a void where a sun had once shone. Civilians, planetary governors, the administratum's bureaucrats. No one had survived, no archives were transmitted, no vox grills relayed emergency warnings. Only the ghost of their absence lingered, a residue that the mind refused to accept. He could almost feel the weight of billions of vanished lives pressing against his consciousness, an invisible shadow stretching across the bridge and the corridors of his vessel alike. Even the navigators shifted uneasily in their gravity fields. Their third eyes pulsed with a soft, unsteady glow, signaling their distress in ways ordinary humans could barely perceive. The warp itself seemed to resist their probing, folding back upon itself, as if recoiling from the voids left behind. "It is wrong," one whispered, voice almost lost beneath the hum of life support. "These coordinates, they do not exist." Ralvan did not respond. Words were inadequate. Any explanation they could offer would be mere conjecture against a phenomenon that defied the laws of the cosmos as he knew them. The murmurs of the tech priests rose and fell, a low mechanical chant blending devotion with worry. They spoke of ancient doctrines, of systems recorded in old liturgies, of worlds meant to remain under the Emperor's light yet disappearing as though snuffed from existence. Some suggested that the Omnissiah's guidance faltered here, others that a malign intelligence, perhaps Necron, perhaps worse, had begun an operation the Imperium could not yet detect. Each theory carried its own terror, and Ralvan allowed none to settle too deeply in his mind. He had a duty: survival, observation, and the transmission of truth as far as it could travel. What happened beyond that was for the stars themselves to judge. Outside, darkness stretched, infinite and silent, pierced only by the distant gleam of surviving suns. A faint anomaly pulsed on the long-range scanners, a brief spike in gravitic fluctuation that vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Ralvan's gauntlet clenched around the console's edge. Could it be a warning? A signal? Or merely the universe shrugging at the hubris of humanity? The possibility that such forces existed beyond comprehension, capable of erasing entire civilizations, gnawed at his resolve. Every decision now carried weight not merely of strategy or survival, but of confronting the incomprehensible. The bridge remained silent, save for the soft hiss of coolant, the clatter of servo-augmented limbs, and the occasional electronic chime marking data arrivals. Yet in that quiet, Ralvan could feel the pulse of a galaxy in flux, a hidden current twisting through the void, touching systems without warning, rewriting histories without permission. The emptiness between stars was not simply space. It was an active presence, a consciousness perhaps, or an echo of one, indifferent yet undeniable. He pressed a hand to the viewport again, staring into the abyss that had swallowed countless lives. It was impossible to predict, impossible to prepare for, yet it demanded vigilance, and above all, recognition of its sheer inevitability. As the vessel charted its course toward the next sector, Ralvan allowed himself a single private thought. The silence between the stars was no longer empty. It had weight, it had intent, and it was watching. Humanity had always claimed dominion over the galaxy. Yet here, in the black void where systems vanished without trace, that dominion was revealed as fragile, temporary, and perhaps irrelevant. Somewhere, beyond the reach of sensors and prayers, the universe was reshaping itself, and the lieutenant captain could only wonder if anyone would survive to witness its new order. Night on a starless horizon brought no comfort. The void was absolute, pressing against the hull like the weight of eternity itself. Lieutenant Captain Ralvan lingered at the viewport, the reflection of his own gauntlet hands mingling with distant points of dying light. Every Vanish system left a hole not just in space, but in the collective psyche of the Imperium. Reports were streaming in now from auxiliary ships, each data slate more fragmentary than the last. Some spoke of entire planetary grids disappearing mid-operation, forges sputtering, habitats falling silent, orbital defenses idle as though a god had plucked the worlds from existence with a single indifferent hand. The words were simple, clinical, but the implications were unbearable. Life erased without cause, history rewritten without permission. The Skitarii moved among the consoles like ghosts, their bronze-clad limbs whirring softly, fingers tracing sacred etchings over hololithic panels. They consulted ancient codices, cross-referencing fragmentary archives, while muttering prayers to the Omnissia with fervor sharpened by dread. One tech priest paused, head tilted at an impossible angle as his optical augmetics flickered, eyes glowing with the pale fire of recognition. "The machine spirits recoil," he said, voice vibrating through the deck. "They do not understand. Systems cannot vanish. They were meant to persist." His words were met with solemn nods. In the Imperium, even the machine spirit's perplexity was a warning of grave consequence. Ralvan felt the pressure of observation everywhere, a suffocating tension that seeped into the command deck. The navigators, suspended within their fluid niches, hummed in low resonance, third eyes tracking warp currents with anxious irregularity. Even they could not account for the missing coordinates, their psychic perception of the void disrupted by an unseen presence. "It is a gulf," one whispered. "A breach, but not in the warp. Something else, something vast." The statement hung in the air, unconfirmed yet undeniable, a seed of terror planted in every mind present. Outside, the void seemed to throb subtly, a rhythm beyond calculation, a pulse in the absence of stars. The ship's long-range scanners caught ghostly traces, faint gravitational eddies that suggested something moving through empty space. Not ships, not warp currents, but mass and void interwoven in ways the Imperium's finest minds could scarcely fathom. Ralvan stared at the flickering display, heart hammering beneath ceramite, wondering if those disturbances were the remnants of the vanished systems, or the first hints of what had taken them. The thought was too large, too unimaginable. Yet he could not look away. To ignore it would be to abandon vigilance, to betray the duty owed to billions whose fates had been swallowed by silence. The bridge remained tense, the only sounds the hum of life support and the soft whine of energy conduits. The crew moved like shadows, performing rituals learned over decades, blending devotion, calculation, and fear. Even the Vox grill seemed muted, reluctant to transmit human voice across a void that had proven itself more dangerous than any orc raid, more unpredictable than any warp storm. Reports from distant administrative offices were arriving sporadically, fragmentary and corrupted, yet all confirmed the same grim pattern. Systems erased, populations silenced, history unrecorded. The Imperium's order was under threat not from open war, but from absence itself, a threat that could not be confronted with bolters, with shields, with fleets of warships. Ralvan's eyes returned to the viewport, watching the distant stars burn like distant candles against black silk. Somewhere in that darkness, beyond the reach of reason and technology, the vanished systems were lost. The concept alone was intolerable. Humanity, masters of the galaxy, yet powerless before absence. Every calculation, every prayer, every precaution felt suddenly inadequate. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down like gravity itself. The void had shown its first signs of descent, and the lieutenant captain understood that to survive meant more than skill or courage. It meant vigilance beyond human comprehension, an awareness of the unseen, the unknowable. As the ship adjusted course to investigate the nearest anomaly, Ralvan allowed himself a rare, silent reflection. What force could erase worlds without warning? Was it a weapon, an ancient intelligence, or merely the natural will of the cosmos expressing itself in ways beyond human understanding? The answers were unreachable, yet the questions were unavoidable. Somewhere in that infinite darkness, life had vanished, and the void waited, patient, indifferent, almost sentient in its quiet observation. The lieutenant captain pressed his gauntlet hand to the viewport once more, staring into the abyss, knowing that the silence between the stars was not empty. It had begun to speak. The first chapter of this journey had begun, but Ralvan understood that the true horror was only emerging. The missing systems were a symptom, a signal, a whisper from a galaxy that had begun to bend against the Imperium's grasp. And somewhere in that endless night, the universe was watching, waiting, and testing the resilience of humanity itself. The reports began as whispers, passing from one data slate to another, fragments of signals carrying more terror than certainty. Across the fleet, tech priests huddled over flickering cogitators, piecing together coordinates of vanished systems. Each transmission was incomplete, garbled by distance and interference, yet the pattern was unmistakable. Worlds had disappeared. Entire star systems erased from both reality and record, leaving nothing behind but the faint echo of what had been. The Administratum called them anomalies, the Scutarii called them errors, yet everyone who studied the reports felt the same unspoken truth. Absence had become a weapon, and its scope was unknowable. On the bridge of the flagship, Lieutenant Captain Ralvin traced the blinking coordinates, his finger trembling slightly as he followed the empty trails left across the charts. Each missing world represented billions of lives, entire civilizations reduced to zero. Vox channels crackled faintly with fragmented transmissions from planetary governors and surviving scouts, voices hesitant, fear-laden. Coordinates missing, systems offline. The messages repeated themselves in endless, haunting variations. Even those who had faced the horrors of Xeno's assault and warp storms felt powerless against this. There was no enemy to fight, no signal to jam, no barricade to erect. The darkness itself had claimed what belonged to humanity. Beyond the fleet, the void seemed alive with its own rhythm. Navigators floated in fluid niches, sensing currents that twisted and writhed against expectation, subtle distortions in the warp that resisted all prediction. They spoke in hushed melodic tones, voices more felt than heard, describing impressions of folded space and trembling mass. The reports suggested anomalies that were both immediate and lingering, reverberating across sectors, leaving impressions of systems that no longer existed. "A world erased," one whispered, trembling, "and yet I feel its memory." Even seasoned veterans of the void shivered at the notion that absence could carry resonance, that the void could remember what the mind of man could not. In the manufactorums of surviving worlds, the silence was heavier than any bell. Production halted mid-cycle, assembly lines stilled, servitors paused in eternal half-motion. Records of vanished systems persisted only as gaps, inexplicable absences in otherwise meticulous archives. Tech priests invoked prayers to the Omnisia, their chants blending reverence and fear, and in the quiet spaces between words, the whisper of vanished worlds seemed to echo. Some of the more learned among them suggested Necron involvement, ancient machines awakening from tombs long sealed, consuming matter in silence. Others feared warp-related phenomena, dangerous pockets of immaterial space folding reality in imperceptible ways. None dared speculate aloud that the Emperor's gaze might be diverted, for even the suggestion bordered on blasphemy. Ralvin's hands hovered over the data slates, tracing the lines of loss as if he could anchor himself to the absent worlds. The echo of their existence haunted him, a phantom resonance he could feel in his chest and stomach, a vibration of grief not his own yet impossible to ignore. Some survivors, scattered among nearby systems, described glimpses of vanished planets as they passed the empty coordinates. The orbit would appear for a heartbeat, a shimmer of light and gravity, and then vanish entirely, leaving no trace of anything that had existed. Those who witnessed it described nausea, vertigo, and the sickening sensation that reality itself was untrustworthy. Each story, each fragment of data, strengthened the sense that the Imperium was facing something unprecedented, an absence that was not simply missing, but willful, deliberate, and incomprehensible. Even the fleet psychers, attuned to the currents of the warp, found themselves unnerved. Some reported visions of worlds consumed, their cities reduced to echoes of light, people frozen mid-step, machinery grinding to eternal silence. They claimed that these visions were not dreams, not projections, but fragments of the truth that seeped into consciousness through a thin membrane separating perception and reality. Whether true or not, the Psychers' report spread like wildfire, igniting unease among commanders and crew alike. Faith and superstition mingled with scientific observation, and the boundary between reality and rumor blurred. In every corridor, whispers of vanished systems stirred anxiety, doubt, and awe. The lieutenant captain stepped back from the hololithic display, rubbing his temples beneath the ceramite. Each report, each fragmentary transmission, was a reminder that the galaxy itself was not as immutable as the Imperium had long assumed. The echoes of the vanished were everywhere, an imprint of absence etched across the void. And somewhere in that emptiness, forces moved beyond comprehension, reshaping the boundaries of existence without announcement, without mercy. Ralvan could feel the weight of those echoes pressing in, and he understood that survival would demand more than tactical skill. It would require perception beyond the ordinary, courage tempered with humility, and a recognition that even the Imperium's might not suffice against the silent, patient hand of absence. The echoes of lost worlds did not linger in the void alone. They bled into the minds of those who observed them, twisting perception and distorting expectation. Lieutenant Captain Ralvan wandered the corridors of the flagship, his footsteps muffled against the reinforced ceramite decking, as muted alarms and distant servitor hydraulics hummed beneath the surface. In every shadowed niche, the crew moved with a cautious diligence born of fear and training alike. Even the most seasoned veterans could not shake the feeling that the silence of the missing systems was purposeful, a signal that the universe, or something far older, was speaking in a language no human mind could fully comprehend. The very fabric of space seemed to ripple, an almost imperceptible quiver that made the walls of the vessel feel thinner than they should, as if reality itself had grown fragile. Data slates continued to pour in fragmented reports, fragments of histories erased mid-sentence, coordinates interrupted by empty voids, orbit calculations with missing variables. Each transmission carried the faint resonance of the worlds that once existed, echoing faintly through the ship's communication network as if the systems themselves were attempting to leave a message before disappearing completely. Tech priests, robes smeared with oil and rust, huddled over consoles in quiet fear, murmuring prayers to the Omnicia while scouring ancient records for precedent. None could find it. Not in the archives, not in the liturgies, not in the records of the Adeptus Mechanicus. There was no example of an absence so total, so absolute, that it left only the echo of memory behind. The navigator's eyes pulsed dimly as they traced the warp currents near the missing systems. Their psychic senses caught fleeting distortions, shifts that did not conform to any known patterns of warp turbulence or quantum fluctuation. "It is a hollow," one whispered, voice barely audible, vibrating in resonance with the emptiness beyond. "A memory, not a world. Something records and erases." Their words trembled with unease, for even those trained to perceive the void could not reconcile the paradox of existence and non-existence cohabiting the same coordinates. Ralvan watched them, understanding for the first time that what they faced was not merely a tactical problem, but a fundamental fracture in the comprehension of reality itself. Amid the chaos, scattered Vox transmissions arrived from worlds on the fringes of the disappearing systems. Survivors, few and far between, described haunting phenomena. One officer spoke of a city suspended in starlight, its streets illuminated for a brief moment before vanishing into nothing. Another recounted seeing manufactorums mid-production, servitors frozen with tools in their hands, only to blink and find them gone entirely. Even the data slates that carried these accounts were unreliable, sometimes arriving hours or days late, corrupted by cosmic interference. Yet all agreed on one truth. What had vanished was not destroyed, not hidden, not transported. It had been erased, wiped clean in a silence so thorough it mocked comprehension. In the dim light of a bridge corridor, Ralvan paused beside a maintenance servitor, its mechanical eye flickering faintly as it scanned the hull. He placed a hand upon its cold bronze surface, feeling a resonance unlike any he had known, a faint echo of worlds that once were, caught in the servitor's sensors as a ghostly imprint of memory. He could not interpret it, but he felt the weight of it, the pressing necessity that humanity understand the scale of what had been lost. And yet, even as he pondered the implications, he knew that explanation alone would not suffice. The missing systems were a warning, a challenge, a whisper from forces beyond the Imperium's reach, and the only way forward was vigilance, observation, and the courage to confront absence itself. Rumors began to spread with increasing intensity through the fleet. Some claimed that ancient Necron tombs had awakened, consuming entire star systems with a silent precision. Others whispered of hidden orc warbands moving with cunning beyond imagination, stripping planets like scavengers and leaving nothing but void. A few even suggested the Emperor's light had waned in certain sectors, a divine test of faith and endurance. All these explanations were unconfirmed, speculative, yet each added to the mounting tension. The crew's conversations became a mixture of fear, awe, and obsession, their minds caught between the practical demands of navigation and the metaphysical horror of systems erased without trace. Ralvan returned to the bridge, placing his hands on the console and staring at the hololithic projection of the missing systems. It was not enough to know they were gone. He wanted to understand why. The echoes of these vanished worlds were almost tangible now, like faint vibrations beneath the skin, whispers of lives, cities, and histories that once existed. Somewhere in that space, something was shaping reality, and humanity's might, its fleets, fortresses, and doctrines, was insufficient to contend with it. The echoes themselves became a presence, pressing against reason and calculation, demanding acknowledgement and respect. The more Ralvan studied the reports, the more he sensed a pattern, though it was subtle, almost imperceptible, a rhythm in absence that defied conventional understanding. Systems did not vanish randomly. They appeared to flicker on the edge of existence, as if some unseen hand had drawn a line and then erased it, leaving the void behind. He moved from one display to another, tracing coordinates and comparing warp readings, trying to reconcile data with perception. But every calculation, every attempt at prediction, seemed to fall short. The missing systems behaved like ghosts, their absence a message rather than an event. Even the Adeptus Mechanicus' most sophisticated cogitators could not decode it. Voices rose across the fleet in hushed reverence and fear. Navigators whispered of memories where none should exist, visions of cities and landscapes now erased from all charts. Some psychers claimed that within the warp they had glimpsed the vanished populations, flickering like sparks before being snuffed. The sightings were inconsistent, subjective, yet a haunting uniformity emerged. Those who perceived the echoes felt both sorrow and terror, a duality that gnawed at their very sense of reality. Ralvan knew that these were not mere hallucinations. Something had left a trace, a shadow of being, and the Imperium had yet to learn whether it was a warning, a curse, or a natural consequence of a force beyond reckoning. On board the flagship, the bridge crew labored tirelessly. Hololithic projectors traced the void in intricate detail, marking systems with blinking red warnings, gaps where worlds had existed, and anomalies where gravitic and warp signatures deviated from expectations. Tech priests moved among the consoles, chanting prayers and consulting ancient liturgies, while Ralvan's voice cut through the low hum of machinery, issuing orders to coordinate scans and cross-reference reports. Every reading carried a sense of dread. The echoes of absence were pervasive, resonating through the ship as though the universe itself were breathing around them. Survivor accounts trickled in from border worlds, fragmented and terrified. One envoy described witnessing a manufactorum suspended in light before disappearing mid-operation, entire assembly lines vanishing with their workers still at their tasks. Another spoke of orbital stations blinking out of existence, leaving nothing behind but a faint echo of radiation. Even the most pragmatic officers admitted that the descriptions defied logic. And yet, each new account reinforced the pattern. Absence was absolute, leaving behind only the faintest impression, like the memory of a dream slipping through fingers upon waking. Religious interpretation and superstition intertwined with empirical observation. Chaplains and psychers speculated that these vanished systems were a test of faith, a deliberate act to remind humanity of its impermanence. Others feared darker possibilities. ancient Necron dynasties stirring in long-slumbering tombs, orc warbands wielding unknown void-warping technologies, or some entirely new power manipulating reality itself. Each theory carried the same weight of terror, that the Imperium, despite its vastness, might be powerless before the forces now at work. The vanished systems were no longer an anomaly. They were a herald, a manifestation of the Void's will, and humanity's understanding was too small, too constrained, to comprehend it fully. Ralvan stared at the latest projections, his gauntlet fingers tracing empty orbits and disappearing world markers. He felt the weight of those billions of lives, and the moral imperative of his role pressed upon him. Every decision now carried profound implications, not just for survival, but for the preservation of memory itself. The echoes of the vanished demanded vigilance, but they also demanded understanding. The lieutenant captain realized that to navigate this crisis, he could no longer rely solely on protocol, skill, or even faith. He needed perception, intuition, and the willingness to confront the unknowable. In the low hum of the bridge, amidst flickering hololiths and murmuring tech priests, a soft resonance began to emerge in the sensors, a faint, almost imperceptible vibration across the void. It was neither warp nor gravitic, yet it seemed linked to the vanished systems. The lieutenant captain leaned forward, heart hammering beneath ceramite, aware that this might be the first tangible trace of a phenomenon previously inscrutable. The echoes of the vanished were not silent. They were signals, resonances of existence itself, and for the first time, Ralvan understood that the universe was attempting to communicate. The faint resonance pulsed through the ship sensors like a heartbeat, subtle yet undeniable, threading through the empty coordinates of vanished systems. Lieutenant Captain Ralvan felt it in his bones, a vibration almost organic in nature, as though the void itself were breathing, recording, or perhaps judging. The crew moved with careful deliberation, aware of the anomaly's presence even if its source was unknowable. The Skitarii tech priests adjusted conduits and recalibrated cogitators, murmuring prayers and hymns to the Omnisia as though ritual could anchor the impossible. Each gesture, each whispered invocation, felt like a small defiance against a reality unraveling faster than comprehension allowed. Vox transmissions from nearby sectors grew more frantic, the fragmented reports painting a tapestry of terror and fascination. Some observers spoke of entire star systems flickering in and out of existence, faintly visible for a heartbeat, then gone, leaving only a void where geometry and life had once thrived. Others described seeing cities suspended mid-construction, factories humming with invisible energy, only to vanish entirely moments later. The survivors' testimonies were inconsistent, yet a haunting uniformity emerged. The disappearance was not gradual, not merely destructive. It was deliberate, precise, and impossible to predict. Somewhere in the darkness, a force moved with intent, erasing not matter, but memory, leaving behind only the faintest echoes for those attuned enough to perceive them. Religious and philosophical interpretation mingled with scientific observation aboard the flagship. Chaplains argued that the vanished systems were a test from the Emperor, a reminder of humanity's fragility and the limits of divine protection. Psychers murmured of fractured visions in the warp, echoes of people and cities still lingering in immaterial space. Some tech priests speculated about the Necrons, awakening from their tombs to reclaim what had once been theirs, moving with silent, methodical efficiency across the galaxy. Others considered the possibility of a new, unknown force, a power so immense that it could bend the very fabric of reality without warning. Each theory carried the same weight, awe and fear in equal measure, a reminder that humanity's dominion was not absolute. Ralvan's gaze returned to the hololithic projection of the missing systems, tracing the empty orbits with a mixture of fascination and dread. Each vanished world represented not only billions of lives but entire histories and cultures, obliterated in a silence more profound than any battlefield. The echoes of those civilizations seemed to linger in the sensors, subtle vibrations that suggested a memory of existence rather than its cessation. Ralvan felt a moral weight pressing on him. The duty to observe, to record, and to protect the remnants of what remained, even as the universe shifted around him. The vanished systems were more than a mystery. They were a challenge, a puzzle written in the language of absence, demanding recognition and understanding. In the quiet hum of the bridge, Ralvan allowed himself a rare reflection. The galaxy had always been vast, terrifying, and unknowable in part. But even so, the Imperium had relied on certainties. Stars, warp currents, the Emperor's guiding light. Now, those certainties were crumbling. The absence of entire systems was a message, one that the fleet had only begun to perceive. Somewhere in the blackness, something moved with purpose, erasing, testing, and observing. And yet, for all its unknowable scale, it left traces, whispers, and echoes. Signs that could be detected, studied, and perhaps even understood. The task ahead was monumental, and failure meant the permanent loss not only of life, but of memory itself. As Ralvan stood before the viewport, the faint pulse of the vanished systems lingered in the sensors, a rhythm beyond calculation yet undeniable. The echoes were no longer abstract. They were signals, resonating through the void, calling to those who could hear. The lieutenant captain understood, with a weight that settled in his chest, that survival was no longer enough. To endure meant to perceive, to adapt, and to confront forces that had existed long before the Imperium itself. The echoes of the vanished were teaching a lesson, and humanity's first step toward comprehension was simply to listen. The void outside the flagship's viewport was deeper than darkness itself, an infinite expanse in which the few remaining stars seemed almost hesitant to shine. Lieutenant Captain Ralvan stood alone for a moment, feeling the weight of the vanished systems pressing on the minds of all aboard. The echoes of lost civilizations lingered in the sensors, faint, fleeting, like the memory of a dream that had slipped through fingers upon waking. Every report, every fragmented transmission, carried the same pattern. Absence, yet more than absence, a subtle message encoded in silence. He could feel it now, not just in the calculations of his data slates, but in the marrow of his bones, in the pulse of his blood beneath ceramite. The universe had shifted, and the Imperium was only beginning to perceive its new contours. The Skitarii tech priests moved like living instruments, chanting prayers to the Omnisia while recalibrating cogitators and hololithic arrays. Their rituals blended devotion and calculation, as if the ancient rites themselves could anchor the incomprehensible into the realm of understanding. "The machine spirits register the echo," one muttered, his voice grinding against servo-augmented lungs. "It is recorded, yet not tangible. Something watches." The words reverberated through the metallic corridors, chilling in their certainty. Even for those who had mastered the imperceptible rhythms of the void, the suggestion of conscious observation in the darkness was a weight none could easily bear. Across the bridge, the navigators shifted within their fluid niches, their third eyes glowing faintly, tracing impossible patterns in the warp. They did not speak aloud, but their resonance trembled through the decks, a psychic shiver that even the lieutenant captain could feel. The absent system seemed to reach into the warp, leaving trails of memory and faint gravitational distortions, almost like fingerprints pressed into reality itself. Every pulse of the sensors confirmed it. The vanished worlds had not been destroyed, they had not moved, they had been removed, excised with precision. And the echoes they left behind were more than traces. They were a challenge, a riddle, and perhaps a warning. Ralvan's thoughts drifted to the Emperor, seated eternally upon the golden throne, his gaze a fixed light for the Imperium. Yet even the Emperor's vigilance had limits, and somewhere in these empty sectors, forces operated outside the reach of all human comprehension. Rumors had begun to circulate quietly among the bridge crew and auxiliary vessels, whispered in reverence and fear. Some said that the vanished systems were beyond even his direct notice, that what had been erased lingered in the shadows of perception, where the Emperor's sight could not reach fully. Such speculation bordered on heresy, yet it was difficult to dismiss entirely. The stars themselves seemed to hint at omission, a deliberate concealment that no mortal authority could explain. The fleet moved cautiously, every system scanned, every anomaly logged, but Ralvin knew that observation alone would not suffice. The echoes of the vanished demanded understanding, and the lieutenant captain understood the enormity of the task. To confront absence, to read the signals left behind, and to anticipate forces that had already outpaced the Imperium's reach. Each crew member carried their own fear, filtered through discipline, faith, and instinct, but the pattern was unmistakable. Something vast, patient, and precise was at work across the sectors. And if these vanished systems were only the beginning, then the universe itself had begun to shift its rules. In the lower decks, rumors of Necron dynasties awakening persisted, whispered in corridors where servitors moved silently and factory machinery hummed. Some chaplains suggested that the Emperor's light was testing faith, and that the vanished systems were both punishment and lesson, a way to remind humanity of its fragility. Others feared darker possibilities. Unknown intelligences, entities older than the Imperium, moving invisibly, shaping reality without alert or warning. The lieutenant captain could not afford to weigh each theory equally. Survival demanded observation, precision, and the courage to act upon incomplete knowledge. And yet, he felt a gnawing uncertainty, a whisper in the marrow that no amount of discipline could dispel. The vanished systems were not mistakes, not accidents. They were deliberate, and they were far from finished. Outside the viewport, the stars glimmered faintly, distant, indifferent. Yet somewhere in the darkness, the echoes of the vanished worlds pulsed, subtle but persistent, a rhythm that hinted at awareness. Ralvin understood then that the Imperium was being tested not by fire or steel, but by silence itself, by the deliberate erasure of existence, by the patient hand of forces beyond reckoning. And as the fleet continued its slow, careful approach into the sectors bordering the vanished systems, the lieutenant captain realized the weight of responsibility now pressing upon him. To see what others could not, to record what was being erased, and to carry forward the knowledge of those lost systems, even if only as echoes. The echoes grew stronger as the fleet approached the coordinates of the most recently vanished systems. Hololithic projectors traced empty orbits, projecting the absence itself into the bridge as a ghostly lattice of what had once been. Lieutenant Captain Ralvin's gauntlet fingers hovered over the controls, hesitant to disrupt the delicate alignment of scans, aware that each pulse of the sensors was a fragile attempt to interpret what no man had seen and still survive. Even the ship seemed to shiver at the emptiness beyond, the subtle vibrations of engines and machinery resonating against a void that had become more than space. It had become a presence, patient and observant. Vox channels crackled as fragmented communications from distant vessels arrived. Officers spoke in hushed tones, describing ghostly anomalies that flickered on their sensors like memories of reality itself. One scout ship had witnessed a planet shimmer in orbit, briefly illuminated as if reflecting its past, then vanish entirely, leaving only a trace of gravitic disturbance. Another described the residual heat of a sun that had ceased to exist, a dying warmth lingering in the void for a heartbeat before fading. The crew aboard the flagship felt these reports as much as they heard them, an unsettling resonance of absence that pressed against the mind and heart alike. It was impossible to ignore. It could not be measured, only felt, recorded in a trembling log of human perception. Skitarii tech priests worked tirelessly, their bronze fingers tracing sacred diagrams on data slates, their chanting growing more fervent as new readings came in. Each anomaly required cross-referencing against millennia of accumulated knowledge, yet no precedent existed. The machine's spirits recoiled, or at least the priests believed they did, reacting to the presence of absence as though it were tangible. Ralvin felt the unease radiate through the bridge, the subtle tension of humans and machines alike attuned to a void that threatened comprehension itself. Here, the methods of war and governance were meaningless. No armor, no fleet, no prayer could stop a system from vanishing into nothingness. Even the navigators, those rare few who could interpret the currents of the warp, were strained beyond endurance. Their third eyes flickered, glowing faintly as they whispered impressions of folded space, of realities overlapping and retracting. "They are memories, trapped and discarded," one murmured, voice trembling. "I feel the people, their cities, their lives, fading into resonance, and yet present in echoes only." Their words left a weight in the air, incomprehensible to ordinary crew but deeply unsettling. Every pulse of the warp, every shift in gravitational resonance, suggested an intelligence operating at a scale beyond the Imperium's understanding, weaving absence into existence with deliberate purpose. Ralvin moved along the bridge, observing the silent reactions of his officers, sensing the same dread that he had felt for days. The vanished systems were not just an anomaly. They were a challenge to human perception, a test of resilience, and a reminder that the Emperor's dominion, while vast, had limitations. The whispers of the fleet reflected growing fear. What if these vanished worlds were the beginning of a pattern, a signal that the universe itself was being reshaped? Were these acts of ascension force, or merely the natural consequences of forces beyond human comprehension? The uncertainty gnawed at him, even as he forced himself to maintain control, to command, to act. Through the viewport, the void appeared serene, almost benign, yet the lieutenant captain knew better. The darkness carried intent. He could feel it, faint but undeniable, in the sensors, in the warp impressions, and in the lingering resonance of the missing worlds. Somewhere in that expanse, life had been excised with precision, leaving echoes rather than destruction. It was not an act of war. It was an act of erasure, a message that the universe had begun to rewrite its own rules. And humanity, despite all its fleets, faith, and fortresses, had been given only a glimpse of what was possible. Ralvin returned to the central console, tracing the coordinates of the vanished systems once more. He felt the weight of those billions of lives, civilizations, and histories pressing against him, ephemeral yet undeniable. The echoes of what had been lost were now a presence in themselves, subtle but persistent, shaping the crew's perception and testing the limits of human comprehension. The lieutenant captain understood that survival required more than vigilance. It demanded awareness, courage, and a willingness to confront truths that might defy reason entirely. The vanished systems were not just a warning. They were a reckoning, unfolding in the silent spaces between the stars, and the Imperium was only beginning to perceive its scope. As the fleet pushed deeper into the sector where the most recent disappearances had occurred, the void became heavier, almost viscous in its silence. Lieutenant Captain Ralvin paced the bridge, the steady hum of life support and machinery under his ceramite boots seeming to accentuate the emptiness beyond the viewport. Each blink of the sensors brought confirmation of absence, a list of coordinates where stars, planets, and orbiting stations once existed, now reduced to naught. The echoes of these vanished systems were no longer distant. They had become an active presence aboard the flagship, pressing against thought, perception, and the very soul of those who dared to witness them. Vox grills carried fragmented transmissions from smaller vessels, each adding another layer of incomprehensible horror. One frigate reported witnessing an entire planetary system shimmer as though reality itself was misaligned, only to vanish entirely a moment later, leaving the crew with nausea and a gnawing, unshakable dread. Another described orbital defenses collapsing without warning, not by assault but as if the laws governing their operation had been rewritten in silence. Even the psychers aboard the fleet felt a psychic resonance in the warp, fleeting images of civilizations mid-breath, frozen and then erased, their collective consciousness leaving only a faint, imperceptible hum. These were echoes, the residue of existence itself, and Ralvin understood that the universe had begun to mark the Imperium's dominion as fragile and temporary. Tech priests hovered over hololithic projectors, tracing the faint traces of energy that lingered in the coordinates of the vanished systems. Their chants, half prayer and half calculation, reverberated across the deck. The machine spirits sensed patterns, one murmured, voice brittle beneath bronze respirators. "It is deliberate and ordered." There was no room for doubt in that statement. Even the devout, who had long trusted in the Emperor's omnipotent guidance, felt a subtle, gnawing uncertainty. Something in the galaxy moved beyond vigilance, beyond strategy, beyond the reach of fleets and fortresses. It was not simply a force of destruction. It was something older, more patient, shaping the canvas of reality with intent invisible to human eyes. The lieutenant captain moved to the central console, tracing a web of erased systems like a cartographer charting a ghost. There was a rhythm to their disappearance, though faint and elusive, a cadence that suggested an intelligence or design. Rumors had begun to spread aboard the flagship. Some whispered of Necron dynasties reawakening, their ancient logic-guided protocols excising worlds to reclaim what had once belonged to them. Others murmured of powers beyond comprehension, perhaps remnants of civilizations older than the Imperium itself, working with precision that mocked human perception. Even the most seasoned navigators could not fully describe what they felt. The warp itself seemed to twist around the empty coordinates, resonating with echoes of people and cities no longer present. Ralvin's gaze returned to the viewport, where the void stretched infinitely, indifferent yet threatening, carrying the weight of absence like a tangible force. The vanished systems were not merely gone. They were remembered, in the subtle vibrations captured by sensors, in the psychic impressions caught by navigators, in the faint resonance that even machines seemed to perceive. He felt the enormity of responsibility press against him. To observe, to record, to maintain the fragile continuity of human understanding in a galaxy that was rewriting itself silently, deliberately, invisibly. Humanity had faced xenos, warp storms, and civil unrest, yet none of these had matched the existential disquiet brought by the simple absence of entire star systems. In the silence of the bridge, Ralvin allowed himself a rare, private reflection. The Imperium had always relied on the permanence of stars, the constancy of orbital mechanics, the omnipotence of the Emperor's watchful presence. Yet here, in sectors where entire worlds had been excised from existence, none of these assurances held. Faith and discipline, technology and experience, they were all tested against a phenomenon without precedent, a void that acted with deliberation, leaving only echoes behind. And yet, for all the fear it inspired, there was knowledge embedded in those echoes, a faint rhythm hinting at intention, a signal that could, if interpreted correctly, guide humanity through the darkness. The lieutenant captain pressed a hand against the viewport, feeling the subtle vibrations that the sensors could barely detect. The echoes were teaching, warning, and observing in equal measure. The vanished systems were not just an anomaly. They were a lesson writ across the fabric of reality itself, and the Imperium's first step toward understanding was to acknowledge them fully. In the empty light of distant suns, the lieutenant captain realized the full scope of what he faced. To survive was not enough. The Imperium must perceive, interpret, and adapt to a universe that had begun to speak in a language composed of absence and echoes. The stars themselves seemed to recoil as the fleet pressed deeper into the void, their faint light trembling against the oppressive darkness of erased space. Lieutenant Captain Ralvin stood at the viewport, watching the empty coordinates where entire systems had once thrived. There was a rhythm to the absence now, subtle and almost imperceptible, yet undeniable, a cadence of worlds excised with deliberate precision. The fleet sensors, calibrated for detection of ships, anomalies, and warp disturbances, recorded faint traces that suggested more than natural disappearance. Gravity itself seemed to curve differently in these regions, a subtle warping that hinted at forces manipulating matter and memory with surgical accuracy. Vox transmissions from surviving vessels carried reports of the vanished system's lingering resonance. Navigators described faint impressions of cities, populations, and civilizations, not visible but perceptible through psychic attunement. Psychers shivered as they described fleeting visions of people frozen mid-action, their memories vibrating across the warp as echoes, whispers of life that persisted after physical annihilation. It was as though the universe itself had begun recording what had been, retaining memory while erasing matter. Ralvan felt the weight of these reports keenly. They were glimpses of a force so vast and deliberate that the Imperium's centuries of dominance seemed fragile in comparison. In the command center, tech priests worked in near silence, their bronze limbs whirring as they adjusted sensors to capture the faintest resonance. Hololithic displays flickered with the outlines of vanished worlds, their orbits traced and retraced, yet remaining empty. One tech priest muttered prayers to the Omnisia, his voice vibrating through the deck, acknowledging the incomprehensible presence. "It is a pattern," he said, "and yet not for us to grasp fully. The echoes persist where the worlds are absent." Ralvan listened, understanding that even the most advanced minds of the Adeptus Mechanicus could only partially interpret the signals. Something deliberate, intelligent, and patient was shaping the universe beyond the reach of even the Emperor's fleet. Rumors began to spread aboard the flagship, carried in whispers and half-voiced prayers. Some suggested that the vanished systems were the work of Necron dynasties awakening from slumber, wielding technology that consumed worlds without combat or trace. Others feared an intelligence older than the Imperium itself, a being or force observing, testing, and reshaping reality for reasons unknowable to mortals. Chaplains offered a different perspective. Perhaps these were trials, signs of divine testing, a reminder of the Emperor's inscrutable plan. None of these theories could be confirmed, and all carried a chill of fear. The lieutenant captain realized that humanity's survival depended not on certainty, but on perception and the courage to interpret that which defied comprehension. Ralvan returned his gaze to the hololithic projection, following the empty orbits and gravitic anomalies with a mixture of dread and fascination. The echoes of the vanished systems were more than spectral traces. They were active, persistent signals in space, resonating faintly across light years. It was as if the universe itself were recording what had existed, leaving reminders for those who could perceive. Each pulse of resonance pressed against the mind, leaving a haunting awareness of what had been lost, and the lieutenant captain understood the weight of responsibility. To observe was not enough. To understand, to interpret, and to act upon these echoes could mean the difference between survival and oblivion. The bridge grew silent save for the hum of machinery and the occasional whisper of a tech priest. Ralvan felt the subtle vibrations of the void beneath the hull, a rhythm beyond calculation, a heartbeat of absence that carried with it both warning and opportunity. Somewhere in that darkness, forces moved with purpose, shaping existence itself while leaving only traces, impressions, echoes. Humanity had long relied on the permanence of stars and the guidance of the Emperor, but here, at the edge of comprehension, Ralvan realized that survival demanded more than faith and strategy. It demanded awareness, intuition, and the willingness to confront the unknowable. As the fleet adjusted course toward the next set of vanished coordinates, Ralvan pressed a hand against the viewport, feeling the faint tremor that even the sensors could detect. The echoes of billions of lives, of civilizations, of entire histories, lingered in the void, faint yet undeniable. The vanished systems had left their mark, not in matter, but in perception, in resonance, in the fragile memory of the universe itself. And as the lieutenant captain gazed into the abyss, he understood the imperative. The Imperium must listen, observe, and adapt, or risk being erased not by violence, but by absence itself. The chapter closed with the fleet moving in measured silence, each ship aware of the unseen forces at play. The echoes of the vanished continued their haunting rhythm, a subtle, persistent reminder of the fragility of existence and the vast, deliberate intelligence that shaped it. Lieutenant Captain Ralvan, standing at the viewport, felt the weight of the universe pressing upon him and knew that the Imperium's understanding had only begun. Somewhere in the void, the shadows of the Emperor's sight stretched thin, and humanity was learning, painfully, that absence could be more terrifying than any enemy.